Hello, hello, hello. Okay, so couple of things as people are coming in. You do not have to have your video on, just so if you haven't figured that out yet, you guys absolutely do not have to have your video on. That's totally up to you. If you want me to see your gorgeous face, you can put your video on, but if you don't, you absolutely do not have to show your face. I'm actually going to be sharing my screen with you guys, so totally fine to just be a passive listener. I know you guys are doing a bunch of stuff. You're probably cooking dinner on your commute at the way home, but just to give you guys an idea of what's going to be happening, I'm going to be sharing my screen with you guys in a second, and I'm going to be taking you through this curriculum, this masterclass. I'm so pumped. Before we get started, if you wouldn't mind, down below, there's a chat section. Just go and write and put your name for me in that chat section. Tell me where you're from. Tell me your name. Give me a little hello. Give me a little hi. Down in the chat section, tell me your name. Tell me where you're calling in from and where you're at. We only have room for 100 people live, so we'll see how many show up. We ended up having about 500 something sign up. So after 100 people, we're going to kick them off, unfortunately. But hopefully the thing will be recorded, so I'll be able to send this out at some point. So down below in the chat section, if you're just coming in, go ahead and tell me your name and tell me where you're calling from, just so I can see a little bit about who's here. Cool. And so the chat section down below, name, where you guys are from. Very cool. Josh from Philly. Awesome. Sandy from Simi Valley. Not too far from me, actually. Leanne from Alberta, Canada. Cindy from Georgia. Rachel from Alberta. We have Jacqueline from Hermosa. What's up, Jacqueline? Stacy from Melbourne, Australia. Very cool. Love Melbourne. Awesome. We have Diamond. I don't know if I'm saying that right, from Australia. Very cool. Kristen from Alberta. Very cool. Okay, so if you guys are just coming on the call, go ahead and type down below your name and where you are calling from so we can just get a sense of everyone. And as you guys know, you totally do not have to have your video on. If you want to, you can do that. I'm going to take your questions at the end, and we'll do that down in the chat section. So if you guys have questions as things come up for you, feel free to just, when it comes up for you in the masterclass, go ahead and type it down below in that section. That's totally fine. See, we have Lorraine from New Jersey. Very cool. Cindy from Central Florida, hurricane country. Stay safe down there. Carly from Georgia. Very cool. If you guys are just getting on, I'm asking you to put your name and where you're from down in the chat section below. So we have Jocelyn from Cincinnati, Ohio. I have been there. Very cool. Awesome. So again, you guys do not have to have your video on. If you choose to, that is totally up to you. Do not have to, especially if you're calling in, you maybe don't have video capability. Very cool. I'm going to be sharing my screen with you guys in a second. So here's how it's going to go. I talk extremely fast, but I'm going to do my best to try to get this recording and or these slides out to you guys. But at the same time, I want you to stay on because I'm not sure about the tech. This is actually some new software that I'm using. I'm used to using GoToMeeting. I'm using Zoom tonight. But I'm going to do my best to get you guys the recording. I do talk fairly quickly, and we have a ton of stuff to get through tonight. So I'm really pumped that you were here. And if you have questions as I'm going through, go ahead and put them in the chat section. I'll make sure to answer those at the end. And because you guys are here, I have an amazing bonus at the end that I want to share with you. So stay on. I'm going to do my best to go under an hour. If you have any questions, again, I'll make sure that I stay on as long as we need to be able to answer all those questions. Cool? Okay, let me see how I share my screen with you guys. Let's see. Okie dokie. Okay, awesome. Can you guys put down in the chat section if you can see my screen right now? Go ahead and put it in the chat section if you can see my screen. That would be great. You guys let me know. Okay, cool. You guys can see it. Very cool. All right. So we are going to get started. Awesome. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm pumped because we are going to be talking about all different types of diets tonight and also what is going to potentially work for you for lasting results. Thank you guys so much for being here. I'm going to share with you guys a little bit about my journey, just to give you a little bit of context on how I kind of came to a more moderate and mindful way of doing things and why sometimes when it comes to eating intuitively or intuitive eating, which is a little bit different, So I think on some level, it takes a knowledge of some of these diets and also a lot of maybe personal experience. So most of you have probably done 5, 10, 15, 20 different diets over the course of the last 5, 10, 20 years. Totally with you. I'm the exact same way. But I want to run through some of these more mainstream, I don't want to call them fatty diets because sometimes they actually do work for some people, but we'll talk about some of the pros and some of the cons of some of these different ways of eating. And then how do we take all this information, all the stuff that we know about eating, and how do we put it together in a plan that could potentially work for us? So let's go ahead and get started. What exactly we're talking about tonight, we're going to be, again, over some of these common diets, pros and cons, and then we're going to talk about eating for maintenance versus eating for attainment. And so oftentimes I'll talk to someone and they're like, I just need to lose 10 pounds. I just need to lose 10 pounds. Like we always have this constant fat loss goal or weight loss goal. And, bottom line is that your metabolism doesn't respond ad infinitum to, it just doesn't keep responding the same way. Sorry, guys. Honestly, I think that they take the trash out here like every single day. Sorry about that. Okay. Every single hour, I mean. Okay. And we're also going to talk about eating for performance, especially if you are someone who exercises fairly intensely. How do you match your eating to your exercise to make sure that you are doing the best you can when it comes to that? How to create your sustainable, healthy formula. We'll go into that, as well as how to adjust ongoing and troubleshoot. So for example, something might work for a moment and then all of a sudden it doesn't work anymore. So most of us have had that experience where a diet maybe worked the first time and then we try the same diet again and either our body doesn't respond the same way or we just can't stick to it. Like we just can't be compliant. And I spent a lot of time beating myself up personally for not being able to stay on some of these more strict plans. I was like, why can't I do it? I was reading the magazines and I was, going through and going, all these other people can do it. Why can't I do it? And I felt a lot of shame around that. But the reality was that what I was trying to do just wasn't working. And so I needed, and I was forced to come up with a different strategy that could work for me long-term. And that was really scary because I was used to these very kind of strict plans. And so we're going to talk today about process versus outcome, and then how to not be obsessed with it all, because it's so easy to go down the rabbit hole of counting and measuring and all those kind of things. Stay on to the very end. Like I said, I do have a special coaching bonus that I'm going to be sharing with you guys. I'm super, super pumped to give this to you. And you guys are the only ones getting this. I promise you it is so, so high value. And you're the only people getting this. I'm not sharing it anywhere else. And that's going to be at the end of tonight. All right. So let's go ahead and move through. I'm not sure why. Let me just go ahead and, I don't know what these blue things are. Does anyone know what those are? Sounds a bit choppy. Anyone else? Can you guys hear me okay? Can you guys let me know if you can hear me in the chat section? Just go ahead and type that down in the chat section. Sounds good? Okay, cool, awesome, thank you. Perfect. Yes. Okay, let's hope that they're not taking out the recycling every single hour right outside my window. Okay, so as you guys know, I'm Jill, and I identify as a recovering obsessive dieter because up until 2005, my journey went, I was pretty much an athlete all growing up, and up until 2005, I was an athlete, I was a fitness lover, I was always constantly exercising, I was an aerobics instructor, a personal trainer. I also had such a huge appetite as a result of doing a ton of exercise. And I loved it. I mean, I was absolutely in love with fitness. I would exercise for hours and hours and hours. I had a huge sweet tooth. I was constantly eating candy and soda and all these kind of things because I just was feeling as though all the exercise I was doing was contributing to my cravings, but it was okay because I was always exercising enough. I was training so that I could eat whatever I wanted. And that was kind of the way that I never really paid attention to nutrition up until, and so for me, I looked fairly fit. I was pretty athletic. I had a little bit of muscle on me. I kind of had that like a little bit bloated look, just because I was eating a ton of candy and a ton of soda and diet sodas and stuff like that. I would not categorize my eating as healthy. When we talk about healthy eating, we talk about, greens and lean proteins and, good fats and stuff like that. I really wasn't eating that stuff. I was on kind of like a meat and potatoes diet with candy sprinkled in and a lot of soda. And so it was fine because I was exercising quite a bit and I was pretty much a cardio queen. And then something happened in 2006. I did my very first diet. And when I say diet, I mean like my very first kind of strict diet. It was hard, and I did it to get up on stage as a competitor. I did my very first figure competition. And it was the very first time in my life that I had paid attention to my nutrition at all. It was hard, but it worked. And I ended up getting up on stage, and I ended up winning my show at the time. I ended up losing about 20 pounds to get up on stage. And so when I got up there, I just didn't even recognize my body. It was so lean. And I remember the weeks leading up to the show, people at the gym would be like, oh my God, you look amazing. What are you doing? And I didn't have the heart to tell them that I was restricting myself, that I was doing 2 hours of cardio a day. And I was just like, oh yeah, I'm working really hard, this and that. But on the inside, I was really miserable, but I had the excitement of getting up on stage. And so it did end up working. I got on stage. I did well. I did a couple of photo shoots. I ended up getting into a couple of magazines. The problem with this was that I ended up becoming addicted to this look, right? Again, first time I paid attention to nutrition, I ended up becoming addicted to this look. After the first competition, I gained back 15 pounds in 2 weeks. 15 pounds in 2 weeks. That's a lot of weight. And yes, some of it was water weight, but a lot of it was fat weight as well, because I had lost some muscle as well. I was getting ready. And so to see your body get so lean, I was about 12% body fat, and then gain 15 pounds in 2 weeks, I was devastated. And I remember thinking to myself, like, why isn't anyone talking about this? Why is Oxygen magazine not talking about post-competition blues? I felt so much shame and embarrassment. Those people at the gym weeks before who were like, oh my God, you look amazing. What are you doing? I wasn't getting any compliments anymore. I wasn't getting any comments like that anymore. So I thought to myself, well, the only way to get that affirmation back and to feel okay again is to just do another show. And so that sent me down the next 5 or 6 years of doing many competitions over and over and over again, and using competitions as a weight loss tool. And so the diets worked until they didn't work anymore. I was addicted to starting new diets. I love the idea of a start date. I'm going to start on Monday. I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to the grocery store. I'm going to get my food. I'm going to get the Tupperwares. I loved it because being on a plan meant it was super organized. It felt in control. I'm in my kitchen with my food. Everything felt so in control. But the problem was I ended up, again, restricting to the point of losing and gaining the same 20 to 30 pounds multiple times per year. You guys, this is not healthy. Not only is this not healthy on a physiological level, but this certainly is not healthy on a psychological level. Why was I not able to lose and keep it off? I remember seeing people in magazines or competitors and fitness models, and I'm like, they just always look so lean. How are they doing it? And so I had a lot of shame around that. I felt really guilty. I felt so embarrassed and weak. Like, why couldn't I do this? I remember yelling at myself, God, Jill, you can't even go one day without a piece of chocolate. Like, what's your problem? I had all these just really a ton of hatred and self-berating as I was going through this, and I was using dieting and these extreme measures to make myself feel better and to band-aid that stuff. And I ended up becoming super obsessed with food, doing hours of cardio every day, counting and measuring and this constant calculation, sometimes being at the gym 3 times a day just to exercise, just to do more minutes on the treadmill, just to burn more calories. And I never stuck my head up and asked, why am I doing this? And is there another way to do this? The only answer seemed to be just deprive more. If I was gaining weight, or even if I was maintaining, I was like, I need to cut calories, I need to cut carbs, I need to do more cardio. And it just sent me on this tailspin of years and years and years of feeling chained to my routine and to this like obsessive way of doing things. I never asked myself, like, why am I actually doing this? Like, what is the problem here? And so I felt like a lot of hopelessness. I felt miserable, and I felt really stuck to do anything different, even though in the face of this was not really working anymore because my metabolism wasn't responding the same way anymore. And so I come to find out over doing some research on myself and with my clients is that 95% of people who lose weight will gain it all back within 2 years. So maybe you've had a history, or maybe you went on Weight Watchers and you lost 30 pounds. And then over the course of the next 2 years, you ended up gaining it back. And what did you say to yourself? You probably were like, well, I just need to go back on Weight Watchers because that was what worked the first time. Again, that's kind of the same repeating pattern that I was doing. Oh, I need to do another show. I need to do another photo shoot. I need something to train for. I need a start date. I need a deadline. I need we do this with weddings and vacations and all that kind of stuff. We have these like kind of deadlines, these self-imposed deadlines. And 95% of people, and then out of those people, 66% of people will gain it all back and more. because this restrictive way of doing things doesn't work anymore. And we kind of all know this intuitively, but we still think that this time is the time I'm going to stick with it. And that was the lie that I was telling myself, because I had the best intentions. Okay, if I could just be stronger, if I could just have more willpower, if I could just be better this week, then I'll be good. And what happened was, and the reality was that it kept not working. It just kept not working. I kept not being able to do it. And I had a lot of shame around that and embarrassment. But over time, I was like, okay, I realized that this isn't working. So this is like the definition of insanity, right? It's doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So I had to ask myself, why is this happening? Because I wasn't going about things in a sustainable way. And most of us don't. We don't really ask ourselves the question of like, can I see myself doing this forever? Whatever your workout routine is right now, can you see yourself doing it forever? Whatever your eating routine is right now, can you see yourself doing that forever? We aren't taking the time to learn about our bodies and implement is what is right for us, because we're so inundated with nutrition overload. I don't know about you guys, but I was at the height of obsession with eating. I could not get my hands on enough nutrition information. I was reading blogs, I was listening to podcasts, I was reading books, I was reading research papers. You guys, I was like a general public person. I didn't need to be reading research papers. I wasn't trying to get my PhD. I just was constantly looking for more answers. And so it's not a lack of information. In fact, oftentimes it's information overload. It's like we know too much shit, so we feel as though all of the things are really important, and we try to implement 20 things perfectly, and we end up implementing exactly 0 of them. And so we're not taking the time to really ask ourselves, out of all of the nutrition information that we've accumulated over however many years, like, do these things actually work? What of these things is important to me? And as a result of really getting to this like crescendo of information, I came down on the other side and realized that there's really only a handful of things that matter. So in order to gain the level of discernment that I needed to move forward in a more moderate way, I had to have that information overload. I had to get to the point of being so saturated with nutrition information that I had to go, you know what? There's so much out there. I just have to figure out and weed through all of the stuff that I know and figure out what's going to work for me. And that was so scary because I couldn't give it over to a coach. There was no expert who could help me. It was like, okay, this shit is on me and this is really scary and I'm going to have to really buckle down and figure this out. So because our metabolism doesn't keep responding forever. So do any diets work? It really kind of depends on the goal, right? And so we're going to talk tonight about fat loss. We're going to talk about performance, maintenance, etc. But at the end of the day, that one that will work for you will match what I call the 3 E's. So there's the 3 E's, and I always want you to ask yourself, based on the way that you're eating, is this sustainable? So number 1 is it needs to be enjoyable. On some level, you have to actually like your food. I remember, especially when I was competing, when I was dieting really hard, there were moments where like I wasn't deriving even a sense of satisfaction or joy or anything from my eating. And it's not like you need to have a dozen donuts to feel satisfied. It's just like, you know, maybe putting a sprinkle of cheese on your vegetables, or using a little butter in your vegetables, or having a yolk in your eggs, right? Those small kind of, I call them nutritional gimmies or satisfaction factors. These small little things give you a sense of enjoyment in your food. It actually tastes good. You don't need to go into getting a dozen donuts. You can have these small nutritional gimmies, these things that give you a sense of relief in your diet. So on some level, it needs to be enjoyable. Are there parts of your eating day that you do enjoy? Number 2 is that it needs to be easy and effortless. So on some level, you're probably already doing this stuff. Maybe you have like this delicious oatmeal breakfast that you love and it's healthy and you feel good when you eat it, you look forward to it, and it's easy to do with your schedule, right? So it needs to be something. So for example, if you're someone who, just depending on your schedule, like if you are a shift worker, like you might not be able to eat like 6 times a day, right? So you need to figure out what's going to work with your schedule. Some people like fasting. We'll talk about fasting more in depth tonight. Some people like to fast because it narrows the window that they have to think about food, right? And so it's from a psychological perspective, it could be easier. Then the last thing, of course, is effective. What I have found is that most of us just focus on this. We don't ask ourselves, do I actually like this? And is this actually easy? Can I do this forever? We don't ask ourselves those questions. We just go, what works? What's the best way to eat? I remember when I was doing a lot of meal plans for people, I had this one woman who would just say to me, just tell me exactly what to eat, I'll eat it. I was like, okay, I get it. I get that you just want to know what to eat, but we have to ask the questions of like, do you even like this stuff? could you even eat this stuff on the consistent basis? I'm not about to give you ideal foods that you hate or that you can't see yourself incorporating, or you have a family and they're not going to eat it, right? So we have to take into account all of these kind of personal preferences. And so most of us just go, what's the most effective? That's wrong. The most effective is the third priority. First priority, enjoyable. Second priority, easy. Last priority is effective because if you have something that's enjoyable and you have something that is easy, then chances are you're going to be able to do it a lot longer and at least be in maintenance mode at that point, right? And then we can layer on the effectiveness part. And this just depends solely on your goal. Is your goal a caloric deficit? Is it a caloric surplus? Is it caloric matching, which we'll talk about here in a second? That's going to be more of like a maintenance mode. And so these are the 3 E's, and these are the most important things when it comes to sustainable eating that we really have to start to think about. Cool. All right, so we're going to move on and we're going to do an overview of some of these more popular diets. The first is the Paleo Diet. So Paleo, if you guys are unsure of exactly what this is, it is an ancestral diet. It's gluten-free. It is a moderate carb, moderate fat plan, and it typically tends to be higher in protein and higher in vegetables. And so the pros of eating a more Paleolithic diet, when you say ancestral, it means like, cool, what were our ancestors, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago? Did they have access to? What kinds of food do they have access to? And that's really what it's all about. So some of the pros is that it is healthy in terms of micronutrients, in terms of it's a real food diet. So there's no processed food. It's 100% real food. And so you're getting the actual micronutrients, like the nutrients, the vitamins, the minerals, etc. And also the thing about paleo is that it's hypoallergenic. So hypoallergenic just means that it's great for people who have food allergies, right? There's no dairy, there's no grains, there's no gluten. So for someone who has some food sensitivities, it's a hypoallergenic diet, and it's a great way to eat, potentially if it works with the other stuff with your schedule and things like that. The cons when it comes to paleo is that compliance can be a little tougher because it does require a good amount of food prep. So if you're someone who likes cooking, if you're someone who has enough time to cook all your meals at home for the most part, then Paleolithic eating might be good for you. Some things can be overdone. For example, like maybe you've seen a lot of memes about bacon and stuff like that. People who eat paleo just eat bacon and eat fatty meats and stuff. And these things really can add up quickly in terms of fat calories. We'll talk more about that when we get to macros. So you still need to pay attention to quality. So just because you're eating paleo doesn't mean you're eating an 18-ounce ribeye every meal. You do need to pay attention to vegetables as well. And so it's good for someone who's maybe has some food allergies. If you have food allergies, you probably know that. Having more of a Paleolithic style is good. However, for people who need convenience options, it is a little bit more difficult to eat paleo because you do have to prepare more food. It's a more real food diet. Miscellaneous when it comes to paleo is that it can feel satisfying and easy to some people because you are getting to eat natural fats, right? You're getting to eat real food. You're getting to eat things like avocado and fats on meats and bacon and stuff like that. To others, it can feel restrictive. So really asking yourself okay, if I can never have, candy again, then that's not on the menu when it comes to paleo, right? It can't have any processed foods. So for some people like me, I'm a big convenience eater. I love snacks. I love, having things I do eat out of packages a good amount. I like to get, takeout food and stuff like that. And so for me, paleo would be a little bit tougher. I do like the foods, but from just a scheduling preferences perspective, it would be a little bit tougher for someone like me. And then ask yourself, do you have food sensitivities? If you don't have food sensitivities, then there's no real reason why you need to be a strict paleo eater. You can introduce things like grains, you can introduce things like dairy and see how you do on those. Cool? All right, the next diet that I want to talk about, and again, if you guys have specific questions about paleo, feel free to put that in the chat section and we'll definitely get to that if you need any kind of clarification of if this might be good for you or not. But in the context of all the diets that we're going to talk about tonight, I want you to think about a couple things. Asking yourself the question, maybe write this down really quick. I want you to ask yourself, could I see myself doing this long term? Would this type of eating be easy for me? And take into account things like your schedule. That's important, right? Could I see myself eating like this forever? Could this fit into my schedule? Do I like these kinds of foods? So for example, if you're someone who loves to have, oatmeal in the morning, you can't, that's one of your biggest things is you're not going to be able to be on the paleo diet. You like to do whey protein. You're not going to be able to be on the paleo diet. So maybe looking at how you would eat on a normal day and then say, cool, like out of those things, am I eating close to paleo? And if I'm not, what things would need to go? And can I live without those foods? It's really important to know yourself well to be able to stack up against some of these diets. So ask yourself, could I see myself actually eating like this? And it's totally okay if you can't, because I'm not actually necessarily advocating a paleo diet. It could work well for some people, but it needs to work with your personal preferences, your unique scheduling, your psychological sensitivities, your unique metabolism, right? So food allergies versus not, etc. Scheduling, like this would be a nightmare for me. I'd have to cook all my meals and I would hate it. And so knowing yourself, and by the way, there's no one size fits all. This isn't like you have to do it this way, but this might be something to consider. Cool? All right. Next, I want to talk about the keto diet. So keto is really interesting because it has been around for a long time, but it's just kind of come back into vogue as a way for people to lose weight or maintain muscle or whatever. So being in keto is from a biochemical standpoint, it's about achieving ketosis. That's the goal. So ketosis is a state when your body is producing ketones as a result of a very low carb diet, and your body is using ketones for energy instead of carbs. Okay, so it's a very super, super, super low carb diet so that your body, because remember, when you eat carbs, your body's going to preferentially use those carbs for whatever you're doing. It's not going to pull from stored carbs. It's not going to pull from stored fat. It's going to use whatever you ate. But if you're eating very low carb, then your body's going to create ketones, which as an additional alternative energy source. And that is going to potentially produce a fat loss. We'll talk about how here in a second. So again, it's categorized as very low carb, about 5 to 10% max on carbohydrates, moderate protein, like 20% protein, about 20 to 25% protein. So it's not a high protein diet. I think sometimes we think, keto, it's high protein. It's like, no, it's actually high fat. So we're in that like 70% range when it comes to fat. So that's a lot of dietary fat. Historically, the keto diet has been used to treat epilepsy, but now it's being used for mostly, people are marketing it as a fat loss or muscle maintenance type of diet. So when we go down to, a lot of people never achieve ketosis. So like, oh, I do keto, but they actually never get into ketosis. Ketosis is something you can measure by getting, by actually just like testing your ketones. You can get a kit at like, I think CVS or something like that. You can actually test your ketones, and you'll know if you're in ketosis. A lot of people think they're doing keto, but really they're just doing a low carb diet. They're actually not ever achieving ketosis, and they feel like shit and they wonder why. And so the pros of potentially eating keto is that a diet like this can be extremely satisfying. So we know that dietary fats are extremely satisfying, right? They give our food texture, they give our food mouthfeel. They're, foods high in fat tend to be rich, tend to be creamy. And so that from a taste perspective can be really satisfying and really satiating. And it might naturally control calories because of the level of satiation. So if you're eating things like, I don't know about you guys, I love cheese and stuff, but sometimes like I just get, cheese is so rich to me that sometimes I can only have a little bit of it, right? And I'm like, oh, I'm done because it's so rich or whatever. And so sometimes, potentially can create a caloric deficit because of the satiation and the satisfaction generated by a diet like keto. The cons is that compliance is pretty hard. It's really easy to fall out of ketosis. So it's a state that you can achieve, and then in order to stay in there, you have to continue eating this way. But if you have one day, or even you go a little bit high in carb one day, you're immediately out of ketosis and you're back into just like a low carb diet. And so it's not achieving the thing that you want to be achieving. So also from a food perspective, if you're someone who loves carbs and you can't do without them, like you're not going to be able to do keto as much as you want to try it or you like the idea of it. If you're someone who loves carbs, I don't particularly love starchy carbs, but I like candy. I don't want to give that up. I like alcohol. I don't want to give that up. And so it really comes down to the compliance piece. Are you naturally drawn towards more fatty foods? I tend to think some people are more like fat, food type of people, and some people more carb type of people. And so deciding which one of those you might be. And if you are someone who really likes high fat foods, this might be a little bit more feasible for you. But it's also, again, because when it comes to grams of fat, 1 gram of fat equals 9 calories. So it's really easy to overdo these foods. So if you're eating, heavy cream, and then you're eating, a bunch of egg yolks, and then you're eating a bunch of cheese, and all these kind of things, like you can really overdo your calories fairly easy. because these foods are really high in fat. So portion control at this point becomes important. When it comes to keto diet, some miscellaneous things to remember is that a lot of this comes down to the ability for you to do it. What will work for your food taste preferences, your lifestyle, unique metabolism, psychology, etc. So when you look at it, like, again, is this feasible for me? I might like the idea of keto, but if it's going to be a complete 180 from the way that you are eating right now, then that's an issue. I remember when I was doing competition prep and I was giving people diets, I remember seeing this other competition coach on Facebook, and he said something to the effect of, if you get a coach and they give you a diet that looks a lot like what you're already doing, that's a waste of your money. And it was funny because I was like, I think the exact opposite of that. Like, why would I ever give someone a diet that's completely different than what they're eating? They're not going to be able to be compliant with it. They're not going to be able to do it. So while I understood what he was saying about like the value of having coaches, like they give you some sort of, exclusive insight, to me, it was like, I'm not going to give someone, it would be an irresponsible coaching thing to give someone a diet that looked completely different than what they were doing. There's no hope that they would ever be able to comply. And so when you think about it from that perspective, ask yourself, does my natural diet, the way that I eat, does it look more paleo? Does it look more keto? Does it include some fasting? Like, what exactly are you currently doing? And then out of these kinds of things, is there something that you might want to try or try out? And again, with keto, to be in actual keto and not just low carb, you do need to be in ketosis. So that's why this is hard. Some of the things that can be great about keto is there are some brain effects, some psychology effects, like people feeling more focused, having more brain clarity, etc. So for someone who is maybe having a lot of brain fog, getting into ketosis might be beneficial. But again, staying there from a compliance standpoint could be tough. Okay, we're going to talk about fasting. This is the third one. So this is basically, it's super easy. It's having structured periods of time with no eating. And we can get into specifics about so basically this is just nothing that's going to raise insulin, right? Nothing that has calories. And so there's a couple different types of fasting. The first is intermittent fasting. So intermittent fasting tends to be daily. This is anywhere from like a 12 to 16 hour fast, sometimes 20 hours a day of no eating. So you maybe have a window of eating like 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours maybe. So asking yourself, like maybe, a lot of times people ask me the question, sometimes I wake up and I'm not hungry. Do I have to have breakfast? And the answer is absolutely not. But I think like old school, we think like, oh my God, you have to have breakfast. Of course, like 3 square meals. And like, that's kind of like the old rule. But really, if you wake up and you don't have a huge appetite, I think it's okay to honor that. And you might naturally do a 12 and 12 fast, or maybe a 10 and 14 fast or something like that, just naturally. So asking yourself, like, is this something that I'm already maybe kind of close to being able to do or doing naturally? The second type of fasting is alternate day fasting. So alternate day fasting sounds exactly what it is. It's one day you eat, one day you don't eat. And so from I think a compliance standpoint and being able to do something like this, I think it's extremely tough, but it has been shown in research to have some benefit. We'll talk about those here in a second. From like an actual being able to do ability standpoint, I don't love an alternate day fast, but it has been shown in research to be effective for weight loss. And third is 72-hour fast once every 1 to 3 months. So a lot of people will do this. They'll fast for maybe 72 hours, 48 to 72 hours, once a month, or every 2 months, every 3 months. And there are some kind of brain clarity effects to something like that. So some of the pros to fasting is that fasting resensitizes your cells to insulin. So they've actually shown in research that when you take diabetics, and you actually incorporate some fasting for them, it actually starts resensitizing some of their cells to insulin. And so it's important to, if you are someone who maybe you're moving in that direction or like metabolic syndrome direction, having a time of fasting, at least daily, might be beneficial. It can be useful and an easy way to control calories. This is my favorite aspect. So I actually do fasting. I usually fast about 12 hours, sometimes 14 hours and sometimes I'll do coffee. But to me, it is an extremely easy way to control calories. And from a psychological perspective, it feels easy. I don't have to think about food constantly. I'm not waking up and immediately eating something. So if you are having a 10 or 12 hour window of eating, that's just simply less time to eat. The problem is that sometimes if you're like, okay, I'm going to do intermittent fasting and I'm only going to eat for 6 hours today, and then I'm going to fast 18 hours, those 6 hours, because maybe you've been white knuckling it, during those 6 hours, you just binge because you're like, at some point I'm gonna have to stop eating this and I have to go back to fasting. And so you have to ask yourself, does it happen close to naturally or almost naturally for you? Or are you white knuckling it to get through your fast? And then you're having these compensatory responses as a result and you end up binging, right? So we really don't want that. So it's really about knowing yourself as well. You don't have to think about food as much, which is awesome. Like literally you're not like eating 6-7 times a day. You're eating in a smaller window. Lifestyle implications. Does this work for your lifestyle? Maybe if you're a shift worker, something like fasting might work for you. So you don't have to constantly be trying to eat while you're working, if you're a shift worker, etc. And then, so there's some neurological implications. So people, especially who are doing like maybe a 72-hour fast once every 3 months, have reported, again, brain clarity, all those kind of things too, and just feeling like almost like a buzzing inside. And that's very similar to keto when you get into ketosis as well. And so some of the cons when it comes to fasting, we've talked about this a little bit. If you are white knuckling it to get through your fast, then it can result in rebounding and binging behavior, these compensatory responses. You're trying to like, oh my God, I got to get to my fast. I got to get through my fast. And as soon as the fast is over, you're just stuffing yourself. And we don't want that either, because that's just a different version of food obsession. And it can really increase obsession. So you have to kind of know yourself. So I'll give you guys an example. So I tend to fast like 12, 14 hours, not every single night, but in general, for me, that's fairly easy. So if I was trying to go to 16 hours, that would be a little bit tougher for me. I usually notice I start to get hungry between 10 and 11 a.m. And at that point, if I was trying to push it to 12, I might feel deprived as a result of that. And I might overeat as a result of feeling deprived. And so you kind of have to know what maybe would work naturally or close to naturally in your schedule already. So again, I don't think there's anything magic about fasting. It's just that for some people it works in their schedule, personal preferences, from a psychological perspective. And then for other people, it's just too much. They wake up and they're starving. Sorry, that's not going to be for someone who like that. They're not really going to be able to do fasting. From a miscellaneous perspective, the things need to work with your unique schedule, personal preferences, psychology, and this requires a mindfulness practice. So what I mean by that is, let's just say you're going to try intermittent fasting. You're like, you know what? I'm not a breakfast person personally. And so I'm going to try intermittent fasting. Maybe I will fast from 8 o'clock at night to 10 a.m. the next morning. That's a 14-hour fast. So maybe you'll have water and stuff like that in between, but maybe you'll fast for 14 hours. And so if you're going to start eating at 10 a.m., maybe around 9 a.m., you start just feeling a little bit hungry. And so that would be a mindfulness practice. You would have to go, okay, cool, I'm feeling a little bit hungry and I still have another hour in my fast. Cool, I'm going to notice that. I'm going to surf that urge. I'm not going to allow it to get out of hand. I'm not going to, as soon as 10 a.m. hits, like just binge in my cupboards. So you kind of use the mindfulness practice of going, okay, cool, I have about another hour. And then at 10 a.m., what's my strategy going to be? How am I going to break my fast in a healthy way and not a binging way? And so it does require a little bit of that mindfulness to kind of surf, especially if you're doing something like a longer, like alternate day fast or 72-hour fast. There is going to be a moment where you're going to have to surf some of those urges to get through. But again, pay attention to the compensatory responses as a result of fasting. So you might overeat, you might overindulge, you might binge, right? That's not good. Okay, fasting's maybe not for you, or at least in this way. Cool? Lastly, we are going to talk about macros. We're going to talk about if it fits your macros, macro counting. So when it comes to macros, it just is based on the 3 and also 4, including alcohol, main macronutrients. So we have protein, we have fats, and we have carbs. Proteins, every gram of protein has 4 calories. Every gram of carb has 4 calories. Every gram of fat has 9 calories. And sometimes if you are drinking alcohol, there's 7 calories in a gram of alcohol. So it's important that we it's all based on math, right? And so the idea behind macros is that if we want to lose weight, we need to be in a caloric deficit. So counting macros is very simple. It's just math, right? It's just like this many protein grams, this is how many fat grams, this is how many carb grams I'm going to have today, times however many calories that is. And I know if I'm in a caloric deficit or I'm in a caloric surplus or I'm in caloric maintenance. And I know that based on my basal metabolic rate plus my activity level, et cetera. So if you guys are interested in this, one of my coaching clients. Her name is Eve Guzman. She's Eve Fit Chick on Instagram. She does macros, but she does it in a really responsible way. She ended up losing about 150 pounds herself through macro counting, and she does it in a very responsible way. So she's going to give you your macro counts, but she's also going to help you surf the different kind of psychological urges that come about as a result of it. And so when it comes to macros, knowing your math is going to be key. So the pros for macros is that they do work for fat loss. I mean, they do work for fat loss if you can be compliant. So we know if we're creating a caloric deficit and we're keeping our protein sufficient, then if we do lose weight, we're primarily going to lose fat versus losing muscle, which is awesome. So normally, a diet will start with protein grams in mind. That's kind of where people will start. If you have a coach or you're doing it yourself, you're going to start with your protein grams and meeting your protein needs, most importantly, because you want to maintain your muscle. And then encompasses all different types of foods. So for example, you guys have probably seen the Pop-Tarts and the candy and all that kind of stuff. Oh, if it fits your macros, I can have Pop-Tarts, blah, blah, blah. And so I think that understanding macros is useful for your own education, especially in certain foods, right? So from an educational perspective, understanding nutrients, I think it has value, even just as a regular person. So knowing like, okay, how many grams of protein is in this? How many carbs are in this, right? And not to be obsessive with it, but to have some understanding so that you can make some intelligent choices. And so again, when it comes to what's going to work long-term, if you remember the 3 E's, the third E is it effective? So a lot of times we preferentially go to macro counting because we go, well, it's the most effective, which it is, but we never ask ourselves, can we do this long term? And are we going to end up feeling obsessed with the numbers? So that's the biggest con when it comes to macro counting, is that there's a lot of thinking and planning. And it's funny because I have a friend of mine who does macros. His entire business is based on macro counting. And I saw something of his a while back and he was like, what's so hard about macros? It's just math. It's just simple math. And I'm like, yeah, it is simple math, but it's a constant mental calculation. So it's not just the math that's hard. Like the math is easy. It's the constant mental calculating that can become a full-time mental job. And that is a little bit of a cautionary tale to start to think about something like that. It does require a lot of prep work. You have to know very clearly what foods you're eating, how much you're eating. It can result in obsession if you tend to be someone who really fixates on numbers. And again, we like numbers because it makes us feel organized. It feels organized. We feel in control when we're counting things, but it can veer into some obsession, and we kind of need to know ourselves. I know for me, I like having the understanding of macros, but I know if I start counting something, I will go absolutely batty and I will end up diving headfirst into a pan of brownies. I just know myself. It will just take too much willpower and mental energy. And so it can, again, veer into some of these more unhealthy foods because of the flexibility part, right? Flexible dieting. I can have candy every day. It's like cool, but like also, what are you not having because you're having a shitload of candy? And so just asking yourself, you do need to still pay attention to quality, not just quantity. You do still need to pay attention to quality of foods as well. Miscellaneous macro counting, like I said, it encompasses 2 of the 3 E's. It's effective and it's also can be enjoyable because you're able to incorporate some of the foods that you love in a way that, and if you're just counting macros, you can do that. Cool? If you have any specific questions about macros, we'll be happy to answer those. So when it comes to, like I said, we're going to talk about fat loss, we're going to talk about maintenance, we're going to talk about performance. When it comes to fat loss, what do you need? So first and foremost, you do need a caloric deficit. When it comes to fat loss, you do need a caloric deficit, but you also need a sense of satisfaction, which is subjective, right? So a feeling of satisfaction is subjective. So I can put anyone on this call in a caloric deficit right now, and we can be like, cool, we're in a caloric deficit, we're gonna lose weight. However, if you hate the foods that you're eating, if you constantly feel deprived because you can't have what you want, if you, the foods that you're eating, you dread eating them. So you still have to actually like and enjoy the foods that you're eating. So yes, you need a caloric deficit, but you also need a sense of satisfaction. And so that's kind of the holy grail when it comes to if the goal is fat loss. The ideal way to achieve it is to incorporate foods that you enjoy that also keep you satisfied, and then minimize feelings of deprivation and maximize sustainability, right? So asking yourself, again, I know I sound like a broken record, can you see yourself eating like this forever? And I'm going to give you guys a couple of really important things here in a second, but I want to talk about the richness volume scale. And this is important because when we talk about more rich foods, we tend to feel more satisfied, right? Things like cheese and nuts and nut butters and creamy things, right? These things tend to give us a lot of satisfaction and satiation, but they tend to be higher in fat grams, right? And so remember, as soon as we start eating more fat, we start really getting into high calorie. Foods that are maybe high in volume, maybe they don't have the satisfaction that something like cheese or nut butters do. So for example, if you've ever had, like, I used to eat these big boo-boo, like 8 egg white omelets. There was huge egg white omelets, and there was 8 egg whites in them. And they were huge. They were like massive. And they had only 240 calories in them, which is like nothing. 240 calories was this massive thing. But I don't know about you guys, have you ever eaten plain egg whites? The shit tastes gross. Like, it's fine, but like, I need some cheese or a yolk or something on there. And so when I was having these big boo-boo omelets, I remember I ate the whole thing. It's huge, but I didn't feel satisfied. I'm like, that was it? There's no taste to that. And so if you're someone who knows that you need volume, then you're probably going to be eating more protein and carbs because they're lower in calories per gram. If you're someone like me who doesn't care as much about how much food, I just want my food to taste delicious, I'm going to be on the more richness side of the scale. And as a result of being on the more richness side of the scale, I'm probably going to have smaller portions. Does that make sense, everyone? So volume, these like lower calorie things, you can have an 8 egg white omelet with a whole bunch of vegetables, as many greens as you want, but you might not feel satisfied. You're going to eat all this food, you might not feel satisfied. On the other hand, if I'm only eating things that are really satisfying, like a dozen donuts, right? That's going to just shoot my calories through the roof, and I'm not going to be able to create a deficit. So you have to find balance here. It's important to have enough volume that you're getting enough calories, but also have a little bit of satisfaction so that you like the way you're eating, right? So that's really where we need to pay attention to. Richness and volume. And you might ask yourself, like, which type am I? Which kind of, do I like a lot of food? Cool. If I like a lot of food, I'm going to have to do probably a lower fat diet. If I like a lot of rich food, then I'm probably going to have to watch my portions. Okay. So that's kind of just a very sort of side thing to start to think about. But here's the thing. If we create a caloric deficit, our body does not respond ad infinitum to a caloric deficit. The metabolism compensates. If you have ever been on a diet and at some point it stops working, even though you're still eating the same amount of calories and you're still doing the same amount of exercise, it is because your metabolism has compensated and it has slowed down. It has become more efficient. So our metabolism is always trying to be efficient. It's always trying to be as efficient as possible. But when it's efficient, it doesn't burn as many calories. So what that means is, even though you're creating a deficit or trying to, your metabolism has gone like this, and now you're here. And so you're in maintenance mode. And so if you ever had a plateau, I'm doing all the same stuff, but I'm not responding. It's not because you have crazy hormonal dysfunction. It's just literally because your metabolism has compensated and it's not responding the same way it once did to that deficit. So remember the first diet you ever went on? Boom, your body responded like that. Then you try the same diet, it doesn't respond quite as well. You got to do more. You got to cut calories more, right? So it's this constant metabolic compensation. So if you want to lose weight, it really does behoove you to have periods of time in maintenance. You can't be in a constant caloric deficit. You can be in a caloric deficit for a time if you're trying to lose fat, but then you also need to have a period where you're in maintenance and you give your metabolism a break. You give your metabolism a break, and we'll talk about that here in a second. So maintenance mode, it's a good thing for a while. I know that we hate this because, oh my God, Jill, I just need to lose weight. I need to lose 30 pounds. I need to lose 20 pounds. Every time I love my mom, but every time I talk to her, she has to lose 5 pounds or 10 pounds, right? And so if you're someone who's like, I need to get this weight off, I feel really urgent about it. And I understand, like, there's a desperation about you feel uncomfortable in your clothes and your skin. I get that. So you just want the weight off as fast as possible, but you can lose that weight very rapidly, but just know that you're going to gain it back, and you might even gain back more. And so maintenance mode is something that I advocate with my clients for a time. And when I say a time, I mean something like maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months, and then move into a caloric deficit to achieve a little bit in a sustainable way, to attain, moving into attain mode, and then we move back into maintenance. And so weight loss, again, can't be the nonstop goal. So I think about your metabolism like tires on a car. So we think about, if your tires on a car, the more miles you put on your tires, the more traction wears off. The metabolism is the same way. The more diets you do, the more deprived, then binge, then yo-yo dieting and rebounding and all these kind of yo-yo practices, the more miles we put on our metabolism, the less traction it has and the less responsive it is. And so we need to get it back to responsiveness. And in order to do that, we need to be in maintenance for a while. So alternating periods for maintenance, which is calorie matching, exercise and nutrition matches calorie for calorie. I mean, of course, this isn't exact because your metabolism is constantly changing, but in general, the amount of food that you're eating is pretty much matched to your expenditure and you're in maintenance mode. And you know what? I wrote this blog a while back and it was called Why Maintenance is Success. And it was after I had maintained the same weight for a couple of years. I had shared with you guys earlier in tonight's class that I was losing and gaining the same 20 and 30 pounds, right, for a year, up and down, up and down, up and down. So for me at that point, maintenance was a success. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I don't have to buy new clothes this year. I can't believe all my clothes still fit. And still, maintenance is one of my biggest goals. I want my clothes to fit. I don't want to have to buy a whole new wardrobe. And so maintenance can be the goal, especially if you have a history of yo-yo dieting up and down. And so you do need that period of maintenance, and it's going to benefit your metabolism to do that before you go into a caloric deficit. Ways to do this sustainably. Pay attention to the satisfaction of your food. Do you feel satisfied? So this is something you guys can do on your own. On a scale from 1 to 10, how much do you like the way you eat? I'm a 10 out of 10. I absolutely love the way that I eat. I don't want to change it all. If someone put a gun to my head, it was like, you need to go on a competition diet, I'd be like, shoot me, because there's no way I could ever do a competition diet. I just like my process too much right now. And so what do you feel satisfied with the way you eat? And by the way, satisfaction is not the same as stuffing yourself. I think sometimes we talk about satisfaction, we tend to go, oh, I can feel satisfied. I'll just eat like 3 tiramisus. And it's like, no, that's not satisfying, right? That's stressful. Satisfying is going, I feel good. I could probably eat more, but I feel good. And by the way, you guys, in Physique sessions, which I'm going to share with you guys in a second, in Physique sessions starting next week, we're going to go through all of this stuff in depth so that you can understand some of the different things that are happening with your own metabolism and what this looks like as an example, right? So we're going to really dive deep into that, but I want to kind of give you an overview tonight. Mindfulness helps with portions. Moderation 365 is the place to learn about this. So mindfulness, I always say that mindfulness is like the Mac Daddy tool. It's like the #1 most important practice when it comes to eating, because honestly, if you can be mindful of stuff, then food doesn't have any control over you anymore. So you're not at the mercy of being hangry. You're not at the mercy of, oh my God, I have no food, I'm hungry, I'm stuffed, like I have to unbutton my pants. Like when you're mindful, you're surfing all of those different urges. And so in Physique sessions, we spend a lot of time going through mindfulness practices and what it looks like. And so mindfulness to me is really the Mac Daddy tool. And then choosing more satiating foods. So there's some foods like protein, water, and fiber, especially from vegetables, that is going to keep your blood sugar more stable, and it's going to balance out your mood and your energy and things like that. And it's also going to keep you fuller for longer. So focusing on things like sufficient protein, as many vegetables as you can possibly eat, and making sure that you're hydrated and drinking enough water, that's going to make you feel more satiated as well. So when we talk about like nuts and bolts of nutrition, like if I had any like quote nuts and bolts for you, it would be these, right? Like prioritize these things, and everything else is just bells and whistles. These are like nuts and bolts. Bells and whistles are like, am I feel satisfied? Do I have nutritional relief? Do I actually like the way I eat, etc.? And then so you have to keep your protein sufficient, especially if you want to maintain your muscle, which is extremely important in terms of your metabolism. And then get as many vegetables in as possible. And this is also good not only for the blood sugar effects and the fiber, but also for micronutrients. And micronutrients has optimizes your metabolism from like a efficiency standpoint, right? So optimizing your metabolism, has lots of B vitamins, which helps your metabolism. As long as you're getting enough micros, your metabolism is going to work at its top speed. It's going to optimize your metabolism. Okay, so a couple of things. Satisfaction factor, keep these things in mind as you start to put together the way that you eat. And then we're going to talk quickly about exercise. This is important because, as we know, if you've ever trained for a half marathon or you've trained for an endurance race or something like that, you know that the way that you exercise influences how you eat. I mean, I remember I was training, especially when I was doing 2 to 3 hours of cardio a day for a competition, I was just starving constantly. My appetite was so high. My cravings were through the roof. It was every second I was white knuckling it to not try and eat chocolate because I was doing so much exercise. And as soon as I started backing down my exercise, and especially my moderate intensity cardio exercise, my metabolism just shaped right up. Your metabolism is extremely intelligent. My cravings went down, my hunger went down. I didn't trust that it would, by the way, but it ended up auto-regulating. And that was really cool to see. So a couple things. We know that exercise affects our eating. Our hormones are constantly affecting our food decisions. Cravings, hunger, stress, mood, sleep, energy fluctuations. All of these biofeedback implications, these like symptoms, these things that we can pick up on are influenced by our hormones. And exercise influences hormones just as much as sleep does and food does and stress does and all that kind of stuff. And so our exercise can impact certain hormones like cortisol, growth hormone, testosterone. It can change our brain chemistry, dopamine, GABA, serotonin, all these kind of things. Exercise, and especially the way that we exercise, can influence these things. And I'm not going to get into too much of the biochemistry, but to give you guys an insight, the way that you choose to exercise will affect hormones, and hormones affect hunger, cravings, and energy. Okay, the way that you choose to exercise impacts hormones, and hormones impact hunger, cravings, and energy. So really deciding on what is the best mode to manage those things. Our hormonal responses affect how the body responds and looks, right? A marathon runner versus sprinter. Yes, there's some genetic components, but if we look at the way that a marathon runner is built compared to the way that a sprinter is built, obviously you can tell they train differently, right? They train differently, and as a result of that, their body looks different. And it's not that one looks better than the other. Of course, there's, again, some genetic component, whereas someone who is, very naturally thin and, maybe naturally has less muscle or whatever is probably going to be better suited to marathon run than they are to run a 200-meter dash. But it's important to remember that the way that we train also impacts how we look as well. And so how we train can turn our appetite on or off. Weight training versus cardio. These give our body different signals when it comes to eating. Weight training versus cardio. So weight training versus cardio, it can turn our cravings up or down, how we're training. It can burn muscle, or it can help us maintain muscle. So when it comes to cravings up and down, what do you guys think? Cravings are probably going to be lower if we're focusing on weight training. Cravings are going to be higher if we're doing a lot of moderate intensity exercise like aerobics and jogging and hours on the elliptical. We're going to have increased cravings because it's going to impact our hormones. We're going to be able to maintain our muscle mass a lot more if we're weight training versus doing tons and tons of cardio. So people always say, I like doing cardio because it burns fat, and then I'll use weights to tone up. So the problem with doing a whole bunch of cardio to lose fat is that you also lose muscle. And when you lose muscle, what decreases? Your metabolism, right? Your metabolism decreases, your basal metabolic rate, the amount of calories you're burning at rest. When you're losing muscle, you're also losing your body's furnace. You're losing your body's furnace as well. So you don't want to lose muscle, which means if you're weight training and you're using that preferentially, you're going to be able to maintain your muscle, which is your metabolic fuel tank. That's what's burning calories in your body the most. So the more muscle you have on your frame, the better in terms of metabolism. And then exercise affects your eating. Increased exercise, long duration exercise, hours at the gym, you're going to have a bigger appetite. You're going to have increased cravings. Shorter, more intense exercise, like 30 minutes or less, 20 minutes or less, 10 minutes or less, is going to spare muscle. It's going to help you maintain muscle, and it's going to burn preferentially fat because you're weight training. And it's going to minimize the compensatory responses, less hunger, less cravings, simply because you're doing less exercise, at least long duration exercise. You're doing intense exercise, but it's shorter. And that's going to have different implications on hunger and cravings. Cool? So I know this is a lot to take in, and I'm talking extremely quickly, but I want to give you guys a sense. And you know this intuitively. You're listening to this and you're going, yeah, I get that. When I do more exercise, I do feel starving. Cool, that's all we're talking about. When I do more weight training, I tend to have more muscle. I sleep better, like all these kind of things. So just understanding that the way that we choose to exercise impacts hormones. Weight training and sufficient protein is going to give us that muscle maintenance or muscle building. This is the most metabolically active tissue in our body is our muscle. So when we're doing weight training and we're keeping our protein up, that's really ideal for metabolism. When we're doing a lot of long, moderate intensity cardio, I know we think we need to do this because we're like, I need to burn calories. Does it burn calories? Sure. But you're putting your body under a state of chronic stress. And we all know what stress does to hunger and cravings. The more stress we're at work, we're eating stuff. The more emotional stress we have, the more we're eating stuff, right? And it's going to potentially lead to muscle wasting, which again has implications for the metabolism. So the goal here is shorter workouts, more intense workouts, and then weight training preferentially. Very simple. Shorter workouts, more intense workouts, preferentially choosing weight training. Okay, so if you're an average person like me, Gen Pop, and you're not training for a marathon, then cool, you should be weight training most days of the week. Sure, do a couple of minutes of intervals, maybe 5-10 minutes of intervals or something like that if you just like the feeling of cardio. But for the majority of the time, you should be weight training. And we're at that stage and we know enough about metabolism that like there's really no reason, especially for a lot of times people will defend cardio by saying, oh, it's so great for heart health. It's not as good as intervals for heart health, because intervals actually trains heart rate recovery. It helps you get your heart rate down fairly quickly after going up, right? So it goes up, then it comes down, then it goes up, then it goes down. So interval training, and by nature, interval training is intense, isn't it? So we can't do it for long. That's why when I say do intervals, I mean like 10 minutes, 15 minutes max. If you're doing intervals for an hour, that's not intervals, that's pacing. That's aerobics. Okay, so true intervals will be short. And that is better for your heart than going out and jogging 5 miles every single day. If you're training for a race, sure, run 5 miles. If you love to run, sure, run 5 miles, but do not do that in the place of weight training. Okay, so do not be like, oh, I'm just gonna do cardio every day and maybe I'll throw in weights. It's like, no, do weight training every day, throw in cardio. That's really the big message here. Okay, so I want to share with you guys something today. I'm going to give you a bonus on the next slide, but I want to introduce you guys to Physique sessions, which maybe you have seen in my emails and you might have seen on my social media. That Physique sessions is a 12-week program that is starting next week. It's a coaching program where you are going to be working with me directly for 12 weeks. I'm super, super pumped about this. I haven't done anything like this in a very long time. I did a 6-week version of it back in the spring, and it was super successful. And because it was, I wanted to roll out a second cohort. We're going to start on Monday. It is a 12-week coaching program with me. It's going to be nutrition and fitness. I'm going to be programming heavier weight training workouts and metabolic conditioning for you. Okay, so we're going to be working out 5 days a week. It says 4 days here because I'm going to be programming heavier lifting days for you. And all of these workouts are going to be short. You guys know this. You know me at this point. All these workouts are going to be short. They're all 30 minutes or less. So even on a day where we're doing more of a traditional weight training workout versus metabolic conditioning, it's still going to be a shorter workout. We're not going to be at the gym for hours. You can do this at home if you have at least one heavier set of dumbbells. I would recommend getting a couple sets of dumbbells, or if you have a home gym, that's fine, but you do need access to weights. So if you just have bands or something like that, or body weight, it's a no. But I'm going to be programming those for you. I'm also going to be giving you access to Physique finishers, and we're going to be following the 12-week strong and lean track of Physique finishers. So that includes 4 days of heavy, more traditional weight training, as well as metabolic conditioning workouts that I will be providing as part of that program. So really cool, because this is the first time that I've programmed for a group in a long time. We're going to be doing traditional weight training, again, all 20 to 30 minutes, and then also metabolic conditioning workouts. And it also includes a personalized nutrition curriculum. Every other week, I'm going to be going live in our group, and I'm going to be teaching something about nutrition, whether it's moderation, mindfulness, DNCs, cravings, hunger, all these kind of different topics under the umbrella of nutrition. I'm going to be going in depth on each one of those and then giving you guys some homework assignments. So each week I'm going to have some homework assignments for you so that you can start to understand really what's going to work for you. So this is great, this information. Hopefully you guys have found it useful, but I want you to start to think about and ask yourself those high-level questions. How can I manage my hunger better? How can I manage my cravings better? And I'm going to be doing the in real-time work for you to troubleshoot some of those things so that you can start to feel more mindful. You can start to feel like, okay, I can eat moderately. I can trust myself around food. I don't have to binge on the weekend. What does that look like? And we're going to get down and dirty into your exact scenario as part of this program. Also, access to a private community with other members and me. This is where the accountability happens. So if you've been with me and you've done this before, basically we have a thread every day where there's some accountability on the workout. So it'll say like, here's the workout for tomorrow. Post below once you've done it, what weight did you use, etc. So there's that daily accountability part as part of the group, and it's not going to be super strict. So if life gets in the way and you're like, I can only get 4 days in this week, I can only get 3 days in this week, cool. It's like, what's next? Like, it's not going, you guys know that I am so anti these super rigid programs, that I'm always going to encourage you to make it work for you. And you might say to yourself, like, logistically, I might only be able to get in 3 days a week. Jill, what 3 days should I do? What's the optimal way to structure my schedule if I can only do 3 days? Cool, we'll work on that. We'll figure that out, because for me, it is just about consistency. It's just about lowering the barrier to entry so that you guys do something and that you can stay consistent and start to figure some of this stuff out. So we're going to work on that. We'll work on the nutrition stuff. We'll work on the fitness for 12 weeks. And then at the end of 12 weeks, like, you got it. Like, that's my goal for each person, is like, you don't need another program. You don't need to work with a nutrition coach. You don't need to do another diet. Like, you've got it figured out. And like me, you love the way you eat so much and it's working for your goals that you don't want to do anything else. When you have a friend who's like, oh my God, do the keto diet with me, you're like, no, thanks. I know what that is, and it would never work for me, and I'm not going to do it, right? So you don't have this shiny object syndrome anymore. To me, it's important that you figure out what works for you, so much so that you just put your blinders on to all the other stuff that's going on in our industry, and I think that's super important. I have 16 spots left because I already opened up this program to Physique Week participants. So I only have 16 spots left, and as soon as they are filled, I'm going to be closing out shop. So we start on Monday. I will keep it open as long as spots are available up until Monday, and after that, it's gonna go away and we're off and running. Cool. So because you're here, this is where the bonus piece comes in. I'm so excited. I really wanted to gift you guys something amazing for being on this call, and not only for being on this call, but for taking quick action. If Physique sessions is something that you feel like might work for you, if you are someone who feels like, okay, yes, I love the idea of being consistent with my lifting, getting down and dirty into this nutrition stuff, I really want to work with Jill for 12 weeks and have her insight and coaching and things like that. If you feel like Physique sessions might be a good fit for you, I want to incentivize you to go ahead and purchase this evening. So I know it is here at 6 o'clock Pacific time. It's 9 o'clock Eastern time. Some of you guys are in Australia, so it's a lot earlier. I'm giving you guys till midnight tonight, midnight Pacific tonight, to enroll in Physique sessions. And as a result, I'm going to give you access to the 10-week mindset makeover course. This is an additional program of mine. It starts right away, and it is a 10-week email-based course all about mindset, focused on things like body image, self-worth, relationships, and uncovering some of the old narratives that you've told yourself about dieting, about needing to look a certain way, about needing to feel, to have a certain body type to feel good enough. All of these kind of, again, mindset-y type things that are not tactical, they're not logistical, they're more like how I think about the world, how I see myself, how I see other people, what's my perspective, what perspective am I choosing, and what's going to serve me. So it goes through this whole curriculum, and it also gives a ton of examples and also some homework assignments. This program is, honestly, we've had over 1,000 people go through this course. It's one of my favorite courses, and it's all about mindset. So it's not just about, we'll talk about, some nutrition stuff here and there, but most of all, this is a complementary course to what you're going to be doing in the 12-week program with me. Okay, so this is a mindset component. It's going to complement the physical, more tactical stuff that we'll get down and dirty in Physique sessions. So for everyone who purchases from now until midnight, I'm going to be giving you guys access, free enrollment into the 10-week mindset makeover, which is one of my most popular courses. Okay, so I am going to open up for questions. I didn't do too bad. I wanted to go about 15 minutes less than this, but it is a few minutes after 6, and I will stay on as long as you guys want to answer questions. All right, I'm going to go to the chat section. If you guys have questions or things came up, go ahead and type that down below. Okay, so let's see. We have a question from Josh. Been struggling in the past couple of weeks, but really for years with emotional and binge eating. It's a vicious cycle. How do I break it? So this is a great question, Josh. And hopefully you got a little bit of insight. I saw that you asked this question before we started. So maybe you got a little bit of insight into some of the reasons why maybe you're having that compensatory response. So by the way, you guys, binge eating, overcompensating, emotional eating, boredom eating, all this kind of stuff. Yes, a lot of it comes down to mindfulness and maybe not feeling satisfied in your normal choices. So to me, mindfulness really is the key here, because I think we've all had those moments where I call it brain shutdown mode, where we just want to shut our brain off and eat with abandon, and I'll deal with the consequences later, right? Sometimes we just have that inside of us, and that's totally fine. But we want to avoid brain shutdown mode. Brain shutdown mode is when we just like turn off our mind, just like stuff ourselves, and we're just like, I'll think about it later. And then what happens? We wake up next morning or wake up after the weekend and we just like, oh, I can't believe I did that again. There's so much shame and stuff. So if we can avoid brain shutdown mode, which sometimes results in binge eating behavior overindulgence, if we can start heading that off at the pass through things like increasing the satisfaction of our meals, feeling satisfied during the day so we don't feel so deprived at night or on the weekend. Some logistical stuff like protein, fiber, veggies, water, etc. If we can do more of that, it will at least help us from a blood sugar standpoint, from a satiation standpoint. But really the top dog tool here is mindfulness. And mindfulness is its own separate training that we actually do in Physique sessions. So if you guys are doing Physique sessions, we're going to go through mindfulness a lot. But Josh, if you're kind of the best thing to do if you want to get more in depth on mindfulness, I fucking hate the word mindfulness, sorry, but like I hate it so much because it feels so intangible. So one of my big pushes has been to help people really understand mindfulness and how to do it. So if you search Jill Fit mindfulness on Google, there's a couple of blogs that will pop up and it's literally like, okay, how to do mindfulness, like what is it exactly and how to do it. So I would start there. It's a great question. I definitely know that you're not alone with that. Okie dokie. Yeah, Josh says he's been obsessed with information for sure. Totally not alone there. Alyssa says, Jill, how do you feel about keto for short-term fat loss objectives and then transitioning into a moderate maintenance diet? Yeah, I think that's fine. So again, I would still always ask you the questions, which is, can you see yourself doing it? Can you be compliant? Because remember, when it comes to keto, it really is a delicate balance. If you go too high carb or even too high protein, by the way. So one thing you might not know about protein is we always hear about carbs increase insulin, right? Increased blood sugar increases insulin. Protein does too, not to the same degree that carbohydrates do, but protein does as well. And so if you're even in a higher protein state, you might get out of ketosis. So in order to be in keto, if you're just in a low carb diet, like you're going to have some compensatory response. If truly in keto and you're testing it by using ketone strips, then it can work for a certain amount of time. And like I said before, if you're going to be in maintenance mode for 3 months, maybe be in attain mode for a month. I think at most you should be in this trying to create that caloric deficit for about a month, then give your metabolism a break, go back to something more sustainable. But you still need to have that mindfulness practice. If you try to do keto and within a week you're binging on sweets, it's like, sorry, then keto is not right for you. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I think sometimes we judge ourselves like, oh my God, I couldn't stay on keto. It's like, cool, it's just not for you. It's just not for you. You don't have to white knuckle it. If it's just not for you, that's fine. But if it's fairly effortless for you, you like the way that you eat, cool, do it for a month, see what results you get, and then go back to something that's a little more sustainable and go back to maintenance mode. Totally fine. Josh says, is fasting 40 to 72 hours once a month or two safe? So I would go at the most once a month on a 72-hour fast. And again, this is just it's obviously, that's a general statement. It's really going to depend on you. And pay attention to your body. Like it's doing a 72-hour fast. I would definitely, keep your water up for sure. You might want to be taking an electrolyte supplement. I think that's probably good as well. And you're still going to get the effects, even if you're taking like some electrolytes and some water and some salt while you're doing it. So you need to take salt, you take electrolytes, you need to do water while you're doing it. You can do things like tea, green tea, stuff like that. Anything that doesn't have calories, you can be doing during a fast. Again, once a month at a max, not twice a month. What about coughing being a stress response that can activate insulin? Okay, so this is a good question. So coffee can increase, it's because it's caffeine, it can increase our cortisol response, adrenaline, noradrenaline, right? So that is a stress response, especially because it is caffeine. So we're going to get that, that metabolic kind of gas pedal in a way. But that does not increase insulin. Again, the only things that increase insulin are carbohydrates and to a certain degree protein, or a really big meal will also just get insulin. So I don't know if you mean instead of insulin, you mean cortisol. And yes, having a lot of coffee definitely increases cortisol, but not insulin. Christine says, when you alternate periods for maintenance and fat loss, what interval do you recommend, days, weeks, or months? Yeah, so this is a good question, and I kind of answered it a little bit, Christine, but I would do ideally At the most, 1 month of attainment, followed by 3 months of maintenance. So you would do, 3 cycles per year on that. And just see how it feels. And if it feels good to you and you feel awesome and like and you're losing and you feel good and you're not white knuckling it, cool. Then maybe you can do a little bit more than a month, but you really need to pay attention to the biofeedback, how you're feeling. Are your cravings going through the roof? Is your hunger, super high? Those things are no-nos, because you might be able to manage them now, but eventually you're not gonna be able to manage them, because you can never win a battle of wills against your physiology. Like, your physiology is an ancient physiology. We are primed to eat. We want to eat. And so that's why mindfulness comes in, and that's, kind of can override some of those more ancestral kind of tendencies, I guess. But that's what I recommend. Alana says, how efficient do you think MyFitnessPal is to have an idea of macros you should be eating? Yeah, MyFitnessPal is fine. I think it's good. If you are someone in wanting to track macros for a time. By the way, you guys, like, I am not anti any type of diet. What I'm anti is restriction. So, and restriction is subjective, right? So restriction is subjective. If I feel I know for me, if I even think about restricting something, I overeat it. Doesn't even matter. I don't even have to feel restricted. If I'm thinking about restricting, I overeat it. So I just know that about myself. And so you have to ask yourself, can I do this? And then you have to notice if you are moving towards a more obsessive, neurotic way of doing things as a result of counting and measuring constantly, then it's not for you, at least right now. Then you have to go back to not counting. But if you want to try macros and you want to play around with it, definitely reach out to Eve. She's probably the person that I trust the most in the industry when it comes to macros, because again, she's doing it responsibly. And I think MyFitnessPal is fine to track those. Okie dokie. Rachel says, how do you curb chocolate cravings? This is a great question. So I do a couple things. Number one, I usually eat chocolate most days. So this is what I call preemptive cheats. And I do actually eat chocolate almost every day, but so my mantra is always, taste everything, binge on nothing. That's what I taste everything, binge on nothing. So for me, I know personally, if I'm trying to constantly not eat chocolate, I will overdo it. Even if it's just tomorrow or next week or next month, I'm eventually going to overdo it. So I actually don't believe in not having or having foods that are off limits. So I don't white knuckle it. I don't do a sugar detox. I don't get off sugar. I don't do any of that stuff, because I've talked to enough people and I've worked with enough people now who say, I just have to get off sugar. Oh my God, I did a sugar detox and it, my cravings went down. I'm like, cool, but you didn't stay on it, so it obviously wasn't the solution. So you have to ask yourself, and by the way, this isn't about you, Rachel, this is just kind of like a side rant about, I don't know that the solution is to 100% not eat chocolate. I think the solution is mindfulness and having chocolate and strategically incorporating it and watching portions. And so we get a lot more into this. I go into this in depth in Physique sessions. And then the other thing I do is I use cocoa, so baking cocoa. So usually at night, especially because for me, I do like to have glasses of wine. And if I don't want to have wine, I'm like, cool, how else can I keep my mouth occupied at night, right? So for me, I'll do baking cocoa, and I'll mix it with hot water and make kind of like a hot chocolate out of it. And I'll use stevia to sweeten it. And then maybe I'll put a little bit of half and half or a little bit of almond milk in it to just thicken it up a little bit. And I'll drink it like a hot drink, like as if it was a hot chocolate. It is a hot chocolate, but I'll use stevia instead of real sugar. And it keeps my mouth occupied for 45 minutes because it's really hot and whatever, and it tastes delicious and whatever. So I do usually use a cocoa drink, especially if I'm just having especially if I'm getting ready to have my period or my menses or whatever, I definitely notice. And by the way, you guys, especially for the women on the call, it's okay to have these normal fluctuations in your cycle based on where you are. You're going to have times where you're more hungry. You're going to have times where you're more craving. And just because you're experiencing that doesn't mean it's a death sentence. Doesn't mean oh my God, I'm so hungry. I'm going to keep eating and eating and float away. It's no, it's just honor where you're at. You might have to eat a little more food today. You might have to eat a little more food over those couple of days. You might have a little more chocolate this week. But as long as you're mindful, it doesn't just keep on going and going and going. Remember, we have a say in that. That's where mindfulness comes in. So this is a good question. Stacy says, how can you figure out what macros you should be eating? I don't do macros, Stacy. So again, I would reach out to Eve if you're interested in that, because she'll probably figure out based on where you're at with things, where you need to start. Normally it will start with a gram, a protein grams. level depending on you, and then it will go from there, and then it'll come up with fat and protein depending on your goals. I'm sorry, fat and carb depending on your goals. But I don't do macros, so I'm not equipped to share that with you. Yeah, brain shutdown mode is a pattern for me. Definitely not alone on that, Josh. So Diamond says, is it individual how much protein will tip over to being converted to insulin, not on keto, since you should prioritize protein at most meals? Yeah. So yes, the question is, here's the thing, is we can overeat any macronutrient. We're just much less likely to overeat protein because it's so satiating. So for example, let's just say you had a chicken breast. I don't know if you ever had like a lean chicken breast, you guys. That's probably about, I would say, maybe 30, 40 grams of protein, right? And it is probably maybe 150, 200 calories, right? So there's no fat and there's no carbs in a chicken breast. So chicken breast is about 20, 30 grams of protein, ends up being, again, maybe 150 calories. It is so lean. And if you've ever eaten a whole chicken breast, it's, again, 150 calories. Like, no one can overeat that. If you have like 4 chicken breasts, like maybe you can, but like that's a lot of chicken. You're probably be stuffed after like 2 of them. So the idea behind protein is that it's just so satiating. It's so filling that oftentimes we don't overeat protein because it's so filling. So that's why I always prioritize protein and vegetables, because vegetables are higher in fiber, at least from a relative standpoint to more like starchy carbs, it's higher in fiber. And so I always prioritize protein and veggies first. So especially if you're at, like maybe as an example, I went out to dinner last night with a friend of mine and we ended up splitting a steak, and then it came with spinach and it came with mashed potatoes. So I was like, do you want to have the mashed potatoes? And he's like, yeah, let's get the potatoes. I'm like, okay, cool. So what I do, and this is just natural for me, I don't have to like worry about it. The potatoes were delicious. But what I did was I first started I always eat my vegetables first because I just want to make sure that I'm getting micronutrients. I want to make sure I'm getting fiber. It's from a health perspective, anti-aging, antioxidants, all that kind of stuff. So I eat the spinach first, and then I move on to the steak. And the steak had some fat in it, so that was very satisfying to me. And by the time I finished with those 2 things, I only honestly wanted like a couple of bites of the potatoes. Like, sure, could I have polished them off? Yeah, but then I would have to like unbutton my pants. And I'm so practiced now at eating to 80% fullness, but that by the time I was ready to dig into the potatoes, I just like wasn't as hungry anymore, right? And I knew I was kind of getting to that point of satisfaction that I didn't need to eat anymore. So by nature, just the way that I put like the timing of the foods ended up that I just ate less of the worst stuff because I was eating more of the protein veggies. So in general, I would prioritize those. Yeah, I do think it potentially could, but we're a lot less likely to overeat protein. Chances are we can maybe overeat if we're doing super fatty proteins. Like if you're eating like bacon, you guys, if you ever looked at the macros on bacon, bacon's a fat. It's not a protein. There's actually more grams of fat in bacon than there is protein grams. So to me, even though bacon has protein in it, bacon to me is a fat food. Because remember, if you're the macronutrient that is the highest in the food is what that food is. So a lot of times people will say to me stuff like, oh, well, nuts are protein. And I'm like, they're not. They do have protein, but nuts are a fat because the highest macro is a fat. People will say like, oh, quinoa has, is protein. I'm like, no, quinoa is a carb, right? Because it has the most grams as carbs. Does it have more protein than other grains? Sure. But it's still a carb food, right? So that's kind of how we categorize it. I don't know if that answered your question, Damon, but I think it is. But I would try and preferentially fill up on protein and veggies. And then after that, I think it's a lot easier, by the way, you guys, and they've shown this in research, that carbohydrates are the least satiating food. So we can overeat them. If you ever had, like, I don't know about you, like I might eat 2 chicken breasts and be stuffed, but I can certainly go to town on 6 donuts, eat 6 donuts in a heartbeat, eat a whole bucket of popcorn in a heartbeat. So it's really a lot easier from a physiological perspective to overeat carbs than it is to overeat protein. That's a good question. Anissa says, what do you think about how keto suits energy balance if 1 gram of fat is already 9 calories, so it's supposed to they're in caloric surplus most of the time? Yeah, so we talked about this. I don't know when you jumped on, Anissa, but we did talk about this, that it's very easy with keto to potentially get into caloric excess. because if you're eating 70% of your 70% of your calories from fat, it's going to add up pretty quickly. And so again, and also like, you know, fats, they are a little bit easier to overeat too. They taste so good, they're rich, etc. So you do have to a little bit watch that. So you have to be someone who is paying attention to portion control for sure. Tracy says, are exogenous ketones effective in helping your body reach and stay in ketosis? Yes, but you still, I would not recommend doing that exclusively. So you definitely want to be in a, so here's what exogenous ketones do. It just gives you additional energy. So it's just like putting, I don't know, it's just like taking in any sort of supplement that your body could use for energy. So I don't know that it helps you get into ketosis. It might help you stay in ketosis if you're there. But again, you still have to be in that very low carb state. And that's why, you know, keto is fine. And there, for some people, it does work, you know, well, because their natural personal preferences and schedule works for that way of doing things. But it's such a delicate balance to go from ketosis into just a low carb diet. And if you've ever gone on a low carb diet, maybe the first time you've ever been on a low carb diet, you feel like shit. And so it's fine, but once you get into ketosis and your body's using ketones, that's why I think maybe exogenous ketones might have some benefit in helping you stay there, because it can provide the energy that you need to feel okay, right? Because we're in that low energy state. You know, we need something to burn, and we can burn ketones. Rachel says, do you take creatine or what other supplements do you recommend? I do not take creatine, but creatine is one of the most researched supplements, and it is perfectly safe. It's one of the most researched supplements. It is definitely effective for muscle gain, but one of the things that creatine does is it pulls water into the cells. So you'll probably see a huge shift in muscle gain fairly quickly, but as soon as you take it out of your diet, you tend to deflate a little bit too. So you'll notice a change in that as well. So yes, creatine does help with muscle gain to a certain degree. It's very well researched. It's perfectly safe. I personally don't take it. I've never taken it. I don't have anything against it. It's just, it's not part of my goals. I was thinking about taking it, or I think maybe even for a time I did take it when I was competing, but at this point it's not part of and honestly, I'm terrible with supplements and even taking them in general, and I just know myself in that way. But I think it's fine, especially if your goal is muscle gain. Absolutely. Any other supplements I recommend? Not necessarily, to be honest. I'm not a huge supplement person. I'm not against supplements, but I do think that if we're constantly trying to take more and more supplements at the expense of real food, or because we think it's some sort of magic pill, I think I'm a macro person. When I say macro, I don't mean like macronutrient. I mean like macro, like I like big dial moving things. And I think when it comes to supplements, it's a fine control. I think food and exercise is a gross control, and supplements are a fine control. I think they're the most important for someone who's maybe not getting enough vegetables and needs to supplement with, you know, maybe some greens or some Reds powder, something like that. If you are someone who's doing a large volume of exercise, if you're training for a marathon, half marathon, maybe you're an aerobics instructor and you're teaching a whole bunch of classes each week, it's important that you potentially look at taking something like branched chain amino acids and or glutamine. Both of those are just amino acids, by the way. Glutamine is an amino acid, L-glutamine. And then branched chain amino acids are three things. They're leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And these amino acids are different because they're metabolized and stored in the muscle, versus other amino acids are stored in the liver, and they're metabolized in the liver. So these three, what's it called? Amino acids, glutamine, valine, leucine, isoleucine, branch chains, they are metabolized in the muscle, so they can give you an energy boost. Your body can use them for energy versus the other ones that they can't. So I do think that to a certain degree, they can be useful. I do recommend everyone be on a high quality multivitamin and also a high quality fish oil. Those are probably, if there was like any like two things that probably everyone should be on: high quality fish oil. I like the Nordic Naturals brand. You can get that at Whole Foods, and a quality multivitamin. I use Metabolic Synergy from Designs for Health. Stacy says, just want to say thank you for taking the time to do this. Very much appreciate it. Awesome. I know I talk really fast. I so appreciate you guys staying on. Carlissa says, thank you for the presentation. Very informative. Awesome. Michael says, as I get older, I find my mobility is beginning to suffer. It takes me longer to recover, and I find that I'm often sore. How do you find a successful balance? How do I get more fit when some days my joints are in pain? So for someone who does have like joint mobility issues, especially, and maybe even like moving towards arthritis and things like that, I would recommend doing more heavier, slower weight training. So things like metabolic conditioning workouts and stuff like that really are not ideal for someone who's dealing with joint issues. You want to start to think about, how can I get stronger, get more stable in my joints? And so doing lower impact activities, so not doing a ton of like jogging and running and stuff like that, instead doing lower impact stuff, and then preferentially doing more slow weight training, just more like make more traditional weight training where you're going a little bit slower. Maybe you're in that moderate to heavy range. You're taking breaks between sets, etc. So nothing like for time and all these kind of like jumping around circus workouts and stuff. I love metabolic conditioning workouts, but when it comes to, and they're so great, but you can get to a point where you need to go back to some heavier weight training at some point too. You can't just do these like 10, 15-minute metcons forever. Your metabolism again will adjust to something like that. So I do think it's important to have more traditional weight training in there as well, progressive overload, etc. So how do you find balance? I'd find a really amazing coach who can program for you. I'm trying to think of who I would recommend who could program, your weight training for you. Michael, if you want to send me a message on Instagram, we can maybe have a conversation about who might be great to program something like that for you. And Anise says, very nice session. Can I have the recording? Thanks. Yeah, I'm going to try to get the recording to you guys. Awesome. Let's look at all the questions. Thank you guys for being so attentive. It means the world to me. I hope that you learned something new from this. And if you have any questions about Physique sessions, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at JillFit, or send me an email, info@jillfit.com. Like I said, if you want to enroll in Physique sessions, tonight is the night to do it. By midnight tonight, you guys will get entry into complimentary enrollment into the 10-week Mindset Makeover, which is an amazing course. And I'm excited for those of you who are going to be on that next journey with me. If you have any questions about Physique sessions, if you wonder if it might be right for you, please reach out to me privately on Insta or send me an email and we can talk through that, and I'll hook you up. All right, guys, thank you so much for being on, and I will talk to you soon. Have a good night.